I feel like there is something within that park, animal or beast, that is a danger to the public.
This Dogman Encounter takes place in the Land Between the Lakes National Recreational Area. It is a vast expanse of heavily forested terrain which encompasses 177,000 acres of land, covering parts of Kentucky and Tennessee. The land between the lakes and its surrounding region has long held dark legends from before the time of the first settlers in western Kentucky. Some of the first Europeans in the area were French trappers and hunters. They claimed that the forests were prowled by a massive beast, half man and half wolf, which would howl in the night and leave mutilated carcasses or animals in its wake. When settlers first arrived in the area, they are said to have been terrorized by some kind of large predator which lurked in the shadows, killing and maiming their livestock, with witnesses saying the culprit was a creature to be feared and was extremely dangerous. The beast is said to look like a bipedal wolf standing around 7 feet tall, with clawed hands, powerful jaws, large white teeth, glowing red eyes, and stinking of rotting flesh. This hairy wolf-like beast on 2 legs is said to howl and shriek blood-curdling screams deep into the night. The sightings and alleged encounters of the beast of the land between the lakes continues into modern times. Today, I will share with you the story of a credible witness, a highly trained police officer with 32 years working as a sheriff's deputy. He is now retired and has finally come forward with a terrifying incident that he promised to keep secret for fear of repercussions with his employer and to avoid ridicule from the public. This is Martin's encounter. The only reason why Martin decided to come forward is because he is retired and no longer cares what people think of him. Telling his story would warn people about the danger to the public. He was told previously that coming forward would be detrimental to tourism if any public reports were to come out. But the danger of animals attacking and eating people was something Martin could no longer keep to himself. His first encounter with the beast of the land between the lakes is a story that happened by proximity and wasn't a direct encounter, but it is worth noting. Martin claims that a bow hunter was actually killed and mauled to death in the land between the lakes, but the official report says that it was an unknown animal, unknown species. The reports that he read and what he was told is that the animal attack was either a bear or a cougar. It had ripped the bow hunter out of his tent and consumed him before pulling his body 300 to 400 yards away from the tent. Martin believes that he actually met this man the day before the attack while he was out scouting in the area. He isn't positive it was the same man, but he was in the same area that Martin had observed him the day prior, and he remembers seeing the man's pickup truck. As a police officer, your job is to be observant, so we have to take into consideration that Martin isn't your average eyewitness. This incident allegedly occurred in Eden, Kentucky. Martin speculates that the attack could have been a hungry animal or an aggressive predator, or even something that was acting territorial. There are a lot of factors to take into consideration when you are dealing with wild animals. I tried to find the police report for this incident, but with minimal details available, I was not able to locate it. I was able to find mention of this incident in my initial search efforts, along with a video clip by another YouTuber who actually went to the site where the attack is believed to have occurred. I will link that video down in the show notes. Now, let's get into Martin's encounter. In the spring of 1993 or 94, Martin and his hunting partner Harry, a friend that he worked with at the sheriff's office, decided to take a 3-day hunting trip into the land between the lakes during turkey season. They would make their camp near the South Bison Range Woodlands Trace area. They had been preparing for this trip for quite some time and were eager to get out into the woods to bag a few prized turkeys. Well prepared, both of them carried shotguns. Martin had a 12-gauge and his sidearm. Harry carried a 10-gauge. The first night, they didn't have any problems at the camp. The next day, they woke up to the sound of a light rain. Both of them moved slowly, got up, and decided to take a small excursion searching for birds. They split up and went on their separate ways. Harry went south towards an old stand that was near a cornfield, and Martin headed northeast towards the woods behind their camp. He knew there was a field that would be a good spot to scout for turkey. The hunting spot had a very nice game trail to follow. Martin followed it for miles throughout the rest of the day. At some point, in the late afternoon, he got an eerie feeling that he was being followed. Martin felt like something was behind him, stalking him. He could hear movement and feel a presence. At this point, he didn't know if it was a human or an animal. Because he was an avid hunter and highly trained in observation, he began to look around. 200 or 300 yards behind him on the trail, he could see movement in the forest. Suddenly, a strange sound, unlike anything he had ever heard, rang out in the forest. He described it as something like a very loud metallic sound. Some speculation and theories attribute this metallic sound to a potential opening of a portal. Again, this is only speculation, but it does line up with one of my personal theories, so I thought it might be worth mentioning as it comes up a lot when you are listening to different cryptid encounters. Martin continued walking through the woods for some time and followed the game trail, edging his way back towards the camp. Suddenly, he caught movement. He could see that there were 2, possibly 3 animals trailing him. Whenever he would stop, they would stop. At this point, Martin just wanted to get back to his camp, so he continued moving forward. And then the woods suddenly fell eerily silent. As he made his way cautiously back down the trail, he heard a distinct knock in the woods. It was like a large boom. Martin described it as if someone had taken an axe or something and hit it against a big tree. At this point, he thought maybe it was just his hunting partner making noise because he was getting closer to the camp. As he got closer to the sound, he saw what he thought was a man in a ghillie suit next to a tree. He didn't think too much of it other than he was just on a hot trail where other hunters might be staked out in the area. As he continued towards the camp, he realized that something was watching him to the west, while something was coming in on the game trail behind him. Whatever these things were, they were tracking him. The whistling sound started again. They were human-like, but were high-pitched and shrill. He just shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was just his hunting partner, Harry, making the knocking sounds and whistling, trying to get him to come back into camp. When he finally arrived at the campsite, his friend Harry seemed shaken. Now, Harry was a very large man, and he was the kind of guy that wasn't afraid of anything, but something had clearly spooked him. This made Martin uneasy. He knew something wasn't right about the situation. Martin apologized for being gone so long, thinking maybe he had upset him in some way, to which his friend replied, "No, it's not that." He was a little bit worried, but was far more concerned about the strange activity happening around the camp. That's when his partner, Harry, broke down and told him what was actually bothering him. His hunting partner said that he had been hearing these whistling sounds and something was hitting a tree nearby. He thought maybe he heard some rocks hitting the ground too. Initially, they both thought it was the other person making the noises and quickly realized it was neither of them. Neither of them really knew what to think. All they could do was sit and talk by the campfire to try to make sense of what had happened. They sat together and put a kettle on the fire to cook dinner. The day moved quickly into darkness with only the glow of the campfire and a small kerosene lamp to illuminate their campsite. There were no streetlights or any external sources of light that deep into the forest. It was pitch black, with the exception of what little light spread out maybe 15 to 20 feet away from the campfire. As they sat by the warmth of the fire, Martin and Harry suddenly felt pressured to leave. This is when all of the activity began. All that was illuminated was the campfire and the kerosene lamp. and Martin noticed what he thought was a man hiding behind a very large tree. At this point, both Martin and his hunting buddy were locked in. They decided they were not going to be made to leave their camp by anyone or anything. This was their camp, and they were going to stay and hunt. Just then, a small limb or a stick came flying off the top of the cliff that was raised above them. Then a rock came from the bluff above them. Martin and his buddy were standing within 5 to 10 feet of each other when the very large rock, maybe 50 pounds, came very close to hitting them. One of them picked up the kerosene lantern to inspect it. Only something very large and very strong could have hurled a rock that size. They were both starting to get very scared. Martin shouted into the night, yelling, "We're both deputy sheriffs, and we're armed. It's not smart for you to come into our camp at night." Harry suggested that they get out their firearms, and he set his shotgun closer to him. Martin's shotgun was laying on the ground, but he was wearing a sidearm, so he readied himself for what would come next. Because it was so dark, their vision was extremely limited, making it even more of a challenge to see what they were actually dealing with, trapping them like easy prey in this little circle of light. The woods fell completely silent. That's when the growling started from wherever this thing or these things were standing. The growl was so intense that it vibrated Martin's chest and within his partner's chest. He described it as a vibration. It wasn't like a growl that he had ever heard in his entire life, and Martin had been around bears, pigs, and even charging boars. And this was something he could not identify. It was in that moment that Martin's fear escalated. As a trained police officer, his job is to attack anything that comes into his sight if it's perceived as a danger. But this thing, or these things that were stalking him and his partner, left them frozen with fear. Martin looked at his friend and noticed that he was breathing rapidly, and at one point his shoulders slumped as if he were not feeling well. Time froze as everything went still. Martin described a low, intense feeling of dread. A wave of nausea hit him, and the vibration moved through his body, ringing in his ears. As he stood there frozen, out of the left side of his peripheral vision, he saw movement. He made a physical move. Once he took that first step, he felt like he was free of the fear, and he pulled his firearm, turned his shoulders to face whatever it was that had caught his attention. As he faced it, he could see that it was a creature that he had never seen before, and it was coming towards him. It had a wolf's head with high pointed ears, with tufts of hair at the tips, and solid black eyes. It smirked at him with an evil grin before exposing its sharp canine teeth. This creature was pure evil. In the glow of the campfire and the kerosene lamp, Martin saw this thing standing upright, walking towards him. Martin wasted no time. He quickly discharged his weapon 2 times in the direction of the creature. He distinctly remembers the flash of the gun and the image seared into his mind like a photograph, capturing the sight of this beastly creature. Burned in his mind, this animal responding to the firearm with an intelligence, like it knew the firearm was dangerous, because it reacted and moved backwards before the gun even discharged. It was as if this creature could jump and leap beyond any human understanding or capability. It jumped to the rock face that was on the side of it, and in an instant it was gone. It disappeared and went over the ridge above them. Martin fired his weapon again. His partner fired in the opposite direction. By this point, Martin is screaming. He knew it was time to get to the truck as quickly as possible. He covered the area above him and to his left with the firearm so he and his partner could back up towards the truck. Martin leapt into the back end of the pickup truck, while Harry threw the door open and hopped into the driver's seat, cranking the engine as Martin stood up in the back. The lights flowed towards a field that was in front of them. Directly in front of Martin stood 2 huge figures, which he believes were the creatures that were stalking him earlier in the woods. He believes that whatever he was firing at to the left of the camp was what people refer to as the Dogman. What he saw in the glow of the headlights of the truck was not the same creature because it towered at least another 2 or 3 feet taller than the animals he had seen in the camp. These were 2 very large creatures. Martin realized that one of them was the exact thing that he had seen in the distance that he believed was a man in a ghillie suit. But it was not a man in a ghillie suit. It wasn't a bear. It was on 2 legs. He believed whatever this creature was, it was the same thing that was whistling the entire time he was in the woods. So whatever was tracking him in the woods was not the Dogman. It was something different. It made him wonder if these large whistling creatures were possibly working in some way with the Dogmen, coordinating and guiding them. Or maybe they were there to protect him and his partner from the Dogmen. He didn't want to stick around long enough to find out. Harry sped off to head out of the campsite. Martin turned to look back at the campsite and something was tearing it to pieces. He could hear the creature screaming as if it were throwing a temper tantrum. As he approached the crossing of a creek bed, one of the creatures tried to latch onto the tailgate of the truck. As it did, it scraped down the side. Harry stepped hard on the accelerator and heard a thud, releasing the creature from the truck as they hit the creek bed. That was the last time either of them saw the creatures. Harry maintained speed and drove for another mile before stopping the truck so Martin could climb into the front seat. That night, the secret was buried and wouldn't resurface again until after Martin's retirement. Sadly, Martin's friend Harry suffered a stroke just a few weeks after the event and did not return to the police force. Martin's story is a compelling one. It's difficult to corroborate the truth of the case of the bow hunter mentioned earlier in the story because there has been no published public information on this case. Make of that what you will, but many of these stories seem to go unpublished and may even be withheld from the public for obvious reasons, especially when national parks and recreational sites are involved. Before I wrap today's story, I will leave you with one more piece of information to consider. One of the most legendary cases of a Dogman encounter in the land between the lakes is of a family who had been camping there during the 1980s. I believe the incident took place around 1982. The story goes that basically an entire family was caught by surprise and mauled to death by this legendary beast of the land between the lakes. To this day, there is no concrete evidence that the beast actually exists, but this information was presented on a website for an upcoming documentary on the beast of the land between the lakes. I will link that down in the show notes below. If you are listening to this story and you uncover any actual reports of the above cases or any additional evidence to support the stories you heard today, please leave a comment down below. As always, stay safe out there. It gets pretty weird in the weird wilderness.